So this will be actually shorter than intended because David and Nigger already talked about a bunch of the things, so I will try to sweep through slides which seem to talk about similar topics. So a bit more meta. So this is like slightly more preparative than, I don't know, like mechanistic interpretability. I think like where to situate what I want to talk about is, I don't know, compared to David's talk, I think this will be more about, like I think David is pointing to some of the same problems. And I will talk more about some approaches to solutions or what to actually do about it. And compared to the GER, I think this will be on a slightly longer time horizon, by where a slightly longer, by the long time horizon could be also something like 2028 or something like 5 years. Or more realistically, when AI systems get like slightly more powerful. So one question, again, the same thing as you've heard in the last two talks from slightly different perspective. What makes human values to stay relevant? What keeps us in power? So the claim is like currently, like I think current reality is a lot of systems are sort of human aligned, but also human aligned because, I don't know, like human labor is the most important component of economy. Like human labor is in developed countries typically something like 2/3 of GDP. Human cognition is crucial to run corporations. Culture is like evolving on human brains and so on. And for each of these factors, you can imagine this can change. So maybe we will become like less economically important, or you can imagine corporations like automating part of their optimization, or you can even imagine culture like being like developed partially by AIs, and because of that, human brains kind of losing part of their value. So I think like there is a bunch of old plans, or sometimes not that old, but plans like how to deal with it, which are kind of at the core of the field of AI safety and AI alignment. So I think the oldest plan, roughly Mary Elizabeth-Witkowski, I think it's currently maybe 15 years old, is something like make the first AGI, historically called seed AI, aligned and safe, and then it grows to superhuman levels and solves everything. So I think a lot of people grown like reasonably like skeptical about this plan for like reasonable reasons, but it doesn't mean this is. With none of the plans, I'm like, this is not clear nonsense. Maybe how this can happen in practice is, I don't know, OpenAI develops the first AGI and it's achieved internally, and the like kind of committee representing humanity composed of like some Altman and some people from US national security will steer it to wisely superhuman levels and it solves everything. I'm like pretty skeptical about it, but I'm not claiming it's nonsense. I think the second plan is something like, I call it like IDA basin, so it's Paul Christiano's idea about iterative distillation amplification, and there is a bazillion of variants of that, which typically include something like making roughly human level AIs, like roughly aligned, and then making like you're kind of like trying to construct some chain where you start from a weaker system and you leverage it to make a slightly stronger system aligned and so on, and you kind of construct these chains where like each arrow like implies the alignment relation, and by this you kind of hope you get from something roughly human level, which is maybe interpretable in human terms and maybe controllable by human technology, to something which is basically super intelligent, but the alignment property kind of like holds along the way. So ideas in this range have there's a bunch of names like scalable oversight and so on. Super alignment is like similar, and I think for a lot of people this is the default plan. I think slightly different plan is something like representational alignment and pointing the search. So here, step one, like AIs will learn what we care about. For example, LLMs will kind of like learn human values by reading all human texts, and they will have a pretty good concept, like pretty good idea what we will mean. And maybe then we will somehow like locate these representations inside of AI and like point them to like kind of amplify them, or there is a bunch of proposals what to do about them, but it's kind of the basic concept is like locate the representations inside, hope the representations hold, and use them for steering. I think like make interpretability is like pretty useful for this type of plan. I think another type of plan or non-plan is just the belief that like you will solve things incrementally and maybe alignment is actually pretty easy, so we will just wait and see, and when we see problems we will mitigate them. So I think with all these plans I think there's a bunch of problems. So like I think one of the core problems is we are not self-aligned. I think this also like holds for us as individuals, even if you imagine the idealized case where like I am one person and I'm trying to get one AI aligned with me. I think this already fails because I'm not aligned with myself. It's not, if you look on like alignment proposals, it's typically not the case that I would all the time do exactly what I endorse, like my morning self could be unhappy about what my evening self was doing. Like I suffer from like internal conflicts, I have kind of like values which are not fully rational, like iterative functions and so on. So for individuals it could be a bit controversial, but I think it's like super uncontroversial, and Digger talked about it. For groups of humans or as humanity, we just want different things. So this is the classical picture of what alignment even means. You have some system H, and you are trying to get system A aligned with it, and alignment is some relation between the systems. So if we have slightly realistic idea about the system H, it has kind of different goals and desires. In principle, this means we don't know what we mean by alignment. I think it's the whole field. The concept of alignment is pretty underdefined. The AI needs to deal with this somehow. So I think there are in principle, few different. You can imagine like some like extreme cases how to handle this. So option one is you get the alignment with the whatever is the existing aggregation process here. On the right side, you align with the outcome of the aggregation process. So if you have an individual human, the individual human approves or disapproves what the AI is doing. Or the corporation kind of like has some internal governance structure and it outputs some, I don't know, constitution. Or humanity runs some collective deliberation and, I don't know, United Nations decide what the AI systems should do. Conceptually and in principle different thing is the thing on the left side A. I think you can think about it as a single AI system, but you can also think about it as a multiple AI system. You can imagine like there are different like AI representatives for different humans, and they negotiate or they enter some game theory type of interactions, which was a topic of yesterday's talk on like focal agenda and so on. And the thing is, and then there is the kind of the third approach, which is something like, the system on the left has enough representation capacity to actually just like learn everything and like run with it. So I think the problem with these is for each of these cases, we can easily find counterexamples why this is probably not what we want, like in the extreme. So like alignment at the boundary, like my cartoon example is, you can imagine like the AI getting aligned with cartoonishly evil version of Soviet Union, where kind of everyone is like suppressed, but the super agent kind of has some preferences. The Soviet ambassador tells the AI what to do, and it's not exactly in the interest of the parts, but the local aggregation process within the Soviet Union kind of like outputs this. Or you can imagine like someone who is kind of slightly psychopathic and wants the AI to help themselves with, I don't know, like removing like all of their values which are not I don't know, utilitarian or religion maximizing or something. So then you have like alignment with the parts, which is something like you have conflicting values, or humans have conflicting desires. We don't agree on all things. So the AI or the system of AIs will kind of learn our values and then negotiate internally. This comes with a ton of problems if you don't know how this is going to happen. One typical problem is some of the parts could be computationally like less powerful. Maybe there will be a representative in this negotiation, there will be a representative of the nearby billionaire who will spend a lot of compute on their like negotiating parts. And like you want, so the computationally weaker or like less bounded, like more bounded part will lose. Or you can have the case that the aggregation kind of depends on everyone being like smart or stupid at like roughly the same level. And like some parts get like really amplified really fast, and maybe you will get a race to the bottom where some values which are like really simple to represent, like profit maximizing, will win over values which are more complex to represent, and so on. I think the third thing kind of learn everything, like the system is powerful, learns everything, and we don't know what's going inside, but yeah, the whole thing will eat a lot of energy and flip a lot of bits, so it must be smart. It's kind of giving up on understanding what's going on. So I think what happens kind of in all of these processes typically is some like value evolution process. You have the different parts and they interact, and the values the system is tracking like evolve. And I think the field currently doesn't have a good pointer or good terminology or a good name for the risk we are pointing to. So I try to like call it the self-unalignment problem. Richard calls it value systematization. I think something very similar is pointed to by Paul Cristiano in one of the stories in like what failure looks like. Another type of these risks is like pointed to by Dan Hendricks in Natural Selection Favors AIs over Humans, even if he covers a bunch of other risks. I think there's a lot of people who try to point to something like that, and yeah, I think we kind of so far failed on like giving it a very clear label everyone would be using. So, okay, so if you kind of buy that this is a problem, and if we kind of upload our conflicts and disagreements and self-unalignment to AIs and like let the AI kind of run with it, I think like how the different plans I mentioned before fail. For example, how IDA fails in this case, you can imagine you upload a conflict to IDA and you kind of upload a conflict, and in each step, like some of the values get like differentially amplified. So you can like locally, it seems fine, but maybe your preference for love or something gets decreased in like by 2% in every amplification steps, and like in a few rounds, like the value is kind of lost, even if nothing is like locally very bad. So I think the default way to bad outcomes here is we basically don't understand how the value evolution process running on AI works. We still started due to local incentives. We kind of delegate our values and decision making to a bunch of AIs. Could be one AI, could be many AIs. I think people are typically confused about the fact that the conceptual boundary between many AIs and one AI is often like way less clean than for humans. This is similar to plants. I think plants are often pretty confused about why they're and so on, and we are too anchored on like it's like million copies of GPT-4. It's one agent, it's like million agents, it's something in between, yeah, we don't know. So yeah, we will start the process due to local incentives. A few years later, most of important cognition runs on AIs, and step 4 is like humans are powerless. and step 5 is like, I don't know what's happening. My current default like X risk from AI scenario is from someone like call it the kind of herd of cows outcome. You can have a herd of cows grazing on a grassy field, and they are sort of like fine and like eating the grass, and they are not necessarily like at that point we are no longer in control. And what happens next is we don't know. Maybe we will kind of happily live ever after. Maybe the grassy field will be better to turn into like chip factories, or maybe, yeah, it's very unclear what happens next. So I'm like very skeptical about almost all claims of, I don't know, the like Eliezer style like doom arguments that we will all die and so on. So I don't know like why that should be the default outcome. But I think the typical way to bad outcomes goes through some step we are sort of powerless, and the important cognition was delegated to AIs. So how to solve it? What's the plan how to solve it? So I think like 2 assumptions for this type of reasoning to be relevant is you assume there are like many entities whose values should be somehow represented. Could be humans, but also could be like non-human entities. And you also the assumptions is like we kind of want the values to evolve. We don't believe we don't want to freeze what we believe now and like make the AI to go with it. So I think like one type of plan is create some overstructure or superstructure where we are part of the superstructure, and the superstructure is like protecting its parts. So I think that we have historically a bunch of examples where this type of system sort of works. So for example, liberal democratic countries have the advantage that they tend to not just wipe out values which are minority or not powered by like kind of too much cognition. For example, in a typically democratic republic, like parties just don't vote to kick some other party out of the parliament, or in a country like Czechia, you just don't get like deleted because the super agent like disagrees with your values. And I think plausibly another example could be your mind. Hopefully you are not monomanic psychopaths who would, for example, just want heroin or like hydrogen atoms or power. And if your mind is able to kind of hold like multiple competing values, and you still mostly act as sort of moderately coherent agent, I think it points as an existent proof to something like you can have something which is like fairly smart, fairly general, such as our mind, and it's able to evolve its values, and it doesn't tend to end up in some like manic state where some crazy, easy to compute thing gets optimized. Also, another frame is like well-functioning institutions. So, yeah, with this goal, so like our plan is ambitious. It's build a better theory. Why we believe this even makes sense to think about? Basically because there are theories which are roughly in this direction, but they are sort of bad. So the basic example is game theory. Game theory is really powerful and somehow influential and doesn't apply to many real-world situations, but had some good impacts on, I don't know, like initially it was pretty scary because it, for example, made like von Neumann to advocate for first strike against Soviet Union, but then people developed a better game theory, and I would claim that part of game theory style of reasoning are the basis of stability of the current like nuclear equilibrium. But I think game theory is like really bad for describing some of the good outcomes. I think you can't easily describe what's good about liberal republic or a good family or kind of like multi-agent organisms. I think game theory is like missing some of the pieces, and yeah, specifically it's missing something about the relations of like super agents and sub agents, kind of how you construct the whole entity protecting its part. I think it's not doable in game theory. I think it's a problem which like multiple people are like thinking about. It doesn't have established terminology yet. Even this effort to think about it is, I think there's like non-trivial amount of people thinking about this. We just don't have a good name for it. Why I think it's worth trying. So I think it's like possible. It's pretty likely that we won't succeed in building a better theory, but very few people are trying because building theory seems like too ambitious, and it doesn't have super good, like fast like incremental loops. The step 2 will be like turn it into something like better optimization targets, or turn it into like institutional designs. Like ultimately we want something like human-aligned institutions which run on AI cognition but still kind of care about us and our values. Different names could be some sort of like scale-free harmony, and so I'm like pretty confident some people should work on this plan. Like us specifically are taking some bet that we can get part of the theory of agency from active inference. And just want to say this is not, I think we moved past just like speculations. I think we have some actual steps in this direction. So the latest thing is it will be on like next week on like ICML workshop on like models of agency. It's mainly by Tomáš and David Hilland, and we are trying to do something between roughly active inference inspired like models of agency and game theory. But it's not clear if this is definitely not the only thing people should be trying. There are things which could be incorporated from physics, sociology, like dynamical systems, multi-agent reinforcement learning. I would be excited about more people like trying to do something about this general plan. And it's not, you don't need to be worried. It's just philosophy or armchair speculation. I think I don't know, like I could show some slides with a wall of equations. I don't think it's useful in this format. But it's one bit, I think like there is a bunch of people who are kind of like thinking about this. Again, this field is not established. So I think Richard here is like kind of expressing very similar ideas, which I endorse. Emmet is expressing similar ideas. You can find ideas in this direction in the work by Dan Hendricks and like Collective Intelligence Project and so on. I think it's like similarly paradigmatic as AI safety was, or AI like technical alignment, and like works like interpretability were maybe like 5 years ago, where it doesn't have established terminology, and I think it's like very hard to give like one label to what we are trying to work on, but I think it's promising. Our plan B is something like maybe theory will fail, but may make sense to make experiments, understand this empirically, and support something like human coordination and autonomy. So if you'd be interested in working on this, I think it's, from a practical perspective, it's good to be not afraid of math. I don't think this is best solved by kind of pure like words-based philosophy. I think like sociology is thinking about systems like agents composed of agents and institutions for many years. I think there are not any great models of group agency. Also, there are many things which became realistic just with progress of AI. I think compared to some other things, this is tricky because some of the things are like unclear, and there are not as fast feedback loops. There isn't any, unfortunately you don't have any like 1 hour tutorial where like you would start, like you would invent something like a game theory, and at the end like you'd be done. it's, in this case, it's like tricky. If you'd be interested in working on this, so I have a stream in maths. I will probably be like mentoring at maths again, or another kind of internship program in this space is PIBBSS, Principles of Intelligent Behavior in Biological and Social Systems, where I was mentoring last year. This year Tomáš is mentoring, and we will be probably continue participate in this. Yeah. So I think that's mostly it. I hope I'm running ahead of time and we have time for questions.
Yeah, we have time for questions. So questions, please.
So thank you for interesting talk. So in my own, I'm the philosopher who is doing what you call the, useless sort of on-board philosophy on this kind of stuff. But I've been my research has been getting into this similar direction, trying to refer this to active inference. So what I would like to ask you is, how do you exactly grasp this concept? Because in philosophy line and neuroscience literature, there are different interpretations of this. There are the more mainstream, sort of Andy Clark sort of line that is more representational in some sense. But I've been also engaging with, more the line that's, trying to interpret it from the full cognition, extended, embodied, and active perspective. So I would kind of know, which way you guys in your research sort of lean when you are trying to understand active inference.
So I think I'm slightly skeptical. So I don't know. My motivation where I kind of want this to be at some point precise at the level of being able to write it down in equations is because I think this is more likely to work for figuring out, I don't know, the objectives we want, maybe more robust, and I think it kind of is a useful sanity check on reasoning. I think, I don't know, I think there is some failure mode where we all agree on something, we want nice things. We can make this claim in many words, everyone would agree on it, and it's a bit unclear what does that mean. Also with some technical models of agency, we want models which are applicable to AI agents and humans at the same time, at the level in which, I don't know, reinforcement learners are optimizing something and we can describe roughly what's going on. So I'm not against people thinking about it, but I think even coming from philosophy side, I think it's probably useful to I think it's probably useful to try to learn the basics of the information theory behind it and so on. Yeah, so yeah, I think currently the best intro to active inference is a book by called Active Inference. It's free on MIT Press. It's already slightly obsolete, but it's way better intro than many super confusing articles by, I can't know, the community is not great at producing very good write-ups. So, but definitely we aim to kind of have something which will allow you to, for example, write something like RLHF. The ideal is we understand how to set up these superstructures in a way where you can set up a training system for AIs RLHF style, rather than have 3 pages of this would be nice to have. I think if people want few pages of this would be nice to have, there is a very old write-up by Eliza Rudkowski on coherent extrapolated evolution, which sort of solves the problem. It's just, if you read it, I think you will agree with a lot of these are good ideas. It's just not telling you almost anything about how to implement it, or what would it mean in practice, or how is this connected to real AI systems. Yeah.
I mean, quickly add to this. I am generally a bit skeptical of the interpretation of active inference. I'm not saying that they're false. I'm just saying I don't really understand them, and I think people are used for different things. Conceptually, it seems very valuable to have the concepts from active inference and use it in other fields to gain more clarity. For me, I'm already happy with it as a model of bounded rationality. And then you can have more assumptions about agents, but it's you bringing in the assumptions, like, structural preferences, prior solar preferences, and stuff like that. Yeah, but I don't want to, this is not my talk, so I don't want to go into it.
Yeah, hello, thank you for the talk. In the beginning, you were showing some methods for alignment. These are really three examples. Something that I'm kind of missing through this whole summer school is apparently everybody just is interested in single AI alignment. Is there nobody doing anything on actually aligning the system of multiple AIs that we have today, something like swarm alignment?
I think here I slightly glossed over it, but here I think you can have the perspective, the box on the left called A is like one system, but you can also have the perspective like this is kind of composed of like multiple AIs which represent like different things. But I don't know. I think sometimes you can. I think like people have a lot of intuitions about individuality in AIs based on like individuality in humans. But I'm pretty unsure if you have, I don't know, if you have GPT something, some like AI based agent, and it's like running in like I don't know, like 500 million like instances or something. Like, is it like a single system or a different system? Or like you can kind of copy the weights and like modify the weights. Like now you have like two different systems, or you can imagine, I don't know, this system kind of decomposes into like multiple components. And I think like for some of the questions, it maybe makes sense to kind of put all of this into some sort of, this is the AI cognition part of the economy. And it's maybe like divided into like very recognizable parts. But maybe it's like divided into like less recognizable parts than humans are recognizable parts of humanity, if that makes sense. So I think there are some good and deep questions about kind of individuality of AI systems, but I think for a lot of I'm slightly skeptical about the agendas which kind of assume like, okay, this AI is one game theoretical agent. This AI is also a different game theoretical agent, and they have clear, they are here, they will enter some game theory situations, maybe, but maybe the whole thing will be more, you have some sort of ecosystem of intelligences and the boundaries are less clear. So I think like if you are interested in something like game theory between advanced AIs, the focal agenda is probably like one of the approaches. The thing which we had on the tutorial, which is like interactions of AI agents, is like different thing. Yeah.